The stars looked different from the bridge of the New Horizon as Captain Jake Morrison watched the massive alien station grow larger on the main screen. 3 months of space travel had brought them to this moment, and Jake could feel the weight of representing all of humanity pressing down on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from Kepler Prime," announced Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez from her position at the communications console. Her voice carried the same nervous energy that had been building among the crew for weeks. Jake nodded and straightened his uniform. "Put it through, Lieutenant." The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at something that still made Jake's stomach flip even after all their preparation. The creature speaking to them looked like it was made of living crystal, its body shifting between different shades of blue and purple as it moved. This was Chancellor Zextara of the Vorthax species, one of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. "Human vessel New Horizon, you are cleared for docking at Bay 7. The alien's voice came through the speakers with a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Please prepare your candidate for the Mindbreaker Protocol examination." Jake felt his jaw clench at those words. The Mindbreaker Protocol. Even the name sounded ominous, and every alien they had met during their journey here had reacted with the same mix of pity and fear when they heard humanity wanted to attempt it. "Thank you, Chancellor," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "We'll be ready." The transmission ended, and Jake turned to look at the woman sitting calmly in the corner of the bridge. Dr. Lisa Harper was reading a book, an actual paper book, completely unbothered by the fact that she was about to attempt something that had driven entire civilizations to madness. She looked up and smiled at Jake with the same expression she might wear while discussing the weather. "So we're here," she said, closing her book and standing up. "I have to admit, I'm curious about this famous test of theirs." Jake shook his head in amazement. Dr. Harper was in her early 40s with graying brown hair that she kept in a simple ponytail. She wore a comfortable sweater and jeans like she was heading to teach a class at MIT rather than face the galaxy's most challenging intellectual trial. Her calm attitude had been both reassuring and worrying to Jake throughout their journey. "Dr. Harper, are you sure about this?" Jake asked for what felt like the 100th time. "The aliens have made it very clear that this test has broken the minds of brilliant beings from species far more advanced than us." Lisa shrugged and picked up her worn leather bag, the same one she carried to her mathematics classes back on Earth. "Jake, I've been solving puzzles my whole life. Hard problems are just puzzles with more pieces. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? Either I solve it or I don't." The worst that could happen, Jake thought, was that she could end up like the Zorathi mathematician, who had attempted the test 50 years ago and spent the rest of his life drawing meaningless symbols on the walls of his cell. But he didn't say that out loud. The docking process took another hour, and Jake tried not to think about how small their ship looked compared to the massive alien station. Kepler Prime was a neutral meeting ground, a place where different species could interact without the political complications of visiting each other's homeworlds. It was also where the Galactic Confederation conducted its most important business, including the admission of new species. When the airlock finally opened, Jake led a small group including Dr. Harper, Lieutenant Rodriguez, and Commander Pete Sullivan into the station. The artificial gravity felt slightly different, and the air had a metallic taste that reminded Jake of breathing near electrical equipment. The corridor they walked through was huge, built to accommodate beings of various sizes. Jake saw several aliens moving about their business and tried not to stare. There was a creature that looked like a walking tree, another that seemed to be made of flowing liquid metal, and something that might have been a floating cloud of energy with eyes. "Fascinating," Dr. Harper murmured, looking around with the same expression she wore when examining a particularly interesting mathematical proof. "Look at the architectural patterns in the ceiling design, Jake. They're using a 17-fold symmetry that shouldn't be possible with normal materials." Jake looked up and saw what appeared to be a normal ceiling to him, but he had learned to trust Dr. Harper's ability to see patterns where others saw chaos. It was why she had been chosen for this mission despite having no experience with alien contact. They were met by a group of aliens in a large circular chamber. Chancellor Zexthara was there, along with representatives from several other species. Jake recognized the Nexari delegate, a being that looked like a human-sized octopus with too many tentacles, and the Chromek observer, which appeared to be a sophisticated robot with glowing red sensors. "Welcome, humans," Chancellor Zexthara said, its crystalline body shifting to a deeper blue color. "We are honored by your presence, though we must express our concern about your decision to attempt the Mindbreaker Protocol." Jake stepped forward. "Chancellor, we appreciate your concern, but humanity believes we're ready for this challenge." One of the Nexari tentacles twitched in what Jake had learned was their equivalent of a skeptical laugh. "Captain Morrison, we mean no disrespect, but your species has only recently achieved faster-than-light travel. The Mindbreaker Protocol was designed by minds that have been studying the universe for millions of years." Dr. Harper stepped forward with a polite smile. "That's very interesting. Could you tell me more about the mathematical principles involved? I'm always curious about different approaches to problem solving." The aliens exchanged what Jake assumed were meaningful looks, though it was hard to tell with beings that didn't have recognizable faces. The Chromek spoke next, its voice a series of electronic tones that the universal translator rendered as flat, emotionless words. "Dr. Harper, the examination involves multidimensional calculus spanning 17 different number systems, quantum probability matrices that account for parallel universe interactions, and temporal paradox calculations that require understanding of causality loops across multiple timeline branches." Dr. Harper nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like quite a puzzle. Do you provide scratch paper?" The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear the hum of the station's life. "Support systems?" Finally, Chancellor Zexthara spoke again, its voice carrying a note of something that might have been confusion. "Scratch paper?" "Yes, something to write on while I work through the problem," Dr. Harper explained, pulling a pencil from her bag. "I always think better when I can write things down." Jake watched as the gathered aliens seemed to process this request. He realized that none of them probably used physical tools for calculation anymore. They likely did everything through direct neural interface or advanced computational systems. "We can provide writing materials," Chancellor Zexthara said finally. "Though I must warn you, Dr. Harper, that the last 7 species to attempt this examination experienced complete mental breakdown within the first hour. The Vorthek term for the test translates roughly to the equation that devours reason." Dr. Harper smiled, the same way she did when one of her students asked an interesting question. "Well, that definitely sounds like it's going to be fun." The examination chamber was completely white with no visible seams or edges, making it impossible to tell where the walls ended and the ceiling began. Dr. Lisa Harper stood in the center of the room, her worn leather bag at her feet and a simple wooden pencil in her hand. Around her, holographic displays showed the watching aliens, who had gathered to witness what they expected to be humanity's intellectual destruction. Jake Morrison watched from the observation deck with growing anxiety. As the alien representatives took their positions, Chancellor Zexthara stood beside him, its crystalline body now a deep purple color that Jake had learned meant the Vorthek was experiencing strong emotions. "Captain Morrison, your Dr. Harper seems remarkably calm for someone about to face mental annihilation," the Chancellor observed, its voice carrying notes of confusion. "Most candidates begin showing signs of stress before the examination even begins." Jake looked down at Lisa, who was testing her pencil on a piece of paper and humming softly to herself. She looked like she was getting ready to work on a crossword puzzle rather than attempt the galaxy's most dangerous intellectual challenge. "She's always been good under pressure," Jake replied, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. Lisa had never faced anything like this before, and neither had anyone else from Earth. The Nexari delegate, Dr. Kelthus, moved closer to the observation window. Its tentacles writhed in patterns that Jake recognized as expressions of scientific curiosity mixed with skepticism. "The neural monitoring equipment is showing very unusual readings from the human. Her brain activity is remarkably stable." That will change quickly, the Chromec observer stated in its flat electronic voice. All previous candidates showed similar initial calm. The breakdown typically begins within the first 15 minutes of exposure to the equation. Jake felt his stomach tighten. 15 minutes. That was all it had taken to destroy the greatest minds from civilizations that had been studying mathematics for millions of years. He watched as technicians finished setting up the holographic display system. That would present the infamous equation to Lisa. "Dr. Harper, are you ready to begin?" Chancellor Zexthara asked through the chamber's communication system. Lisa looked up from her paper with a smile. "Ready when you are." "Oh, and could you maybe turn down the brightness on those walls a bit? All this white is a little hard on the eyes." Jake heard what sounded like choking from several of the alien observers. The idea that someone would make comfort requests before attempting the Mindbreaker protocol was apparently beyond their comprehension. "The environmental controls have been optimized for maximum cognitive function," the Chromec replied. "Any changes could affect the validity of the examination." Lisa shrugged. "Okay, no problem. I've worked in worse conditions." The holographic display materialized in front of her, and Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. The equation was massive, filling the air with symbols and numbers that seemed to twist and move even as he looked at them. Mathematical notations from 17 different alien number systems swirled around probability matrices that hurt to look at directly. Temporal calculations branched out in multiple directions, creating a web of mathematical relationships that seemed to exist in more dimensions than Jake's mind could process. Lisa looked at the display for a moment, then pulled out a pair of reading glasses and put them on. "Well, that's certainly impressive," she said, walking closer to examine the equation. "Very dramatic presentation." The neural monitoring equipment in the observation deck began showing rapidly changing readings. Dr. Kelthus's tentacles started moving in agitated patterns as it studied the displays. "This is impossible," the Nixari scientist muttered. "Her brain activity is increasing, but not in the pattern we expect. She's not showing any signs of cognitive overload." Jake watched as Lisa began walking around the holographic equation, examining it from different angles like she was looking at a sculpture in a museum. She pulled out her pencil and began making notes on her paper, occasionally stopping to tap the pencil against her lips while she thought. "Interesting," Lisa said out loud, apparently talking to herself. "This part here with the 17 number systems looks complicated, but it's really just different ways of counting the same things. Like if someone asked me the same question in English, Spanish, French, and 14 other languages, the question stays the same even if the words are different." Chancellor Zexthara's crystalline body began shifting rapidly between different colors. "She's treating the universal mathematical constants as linguistic variations. This approach has never been attempted." Lisa continued her examination, making more notes. "And this quantum probability section is kind of like weather forecasting, isn't it? You've got all these different possible outcomes, and you're trying to figure out which ones are most likely to happen. The math is fancier, but the basic idea is the same." Jake could see the alien observers becoming more agitated as Lisa's casual observations continued. She was treating their ultimate intellectual challenge like a puzzle in a Sunday newspaper, and her relaxed attitude was clearly disturbing them. "The temporal paradox calculations are fun," Lisa continued, now sitting cross-legged on the floor, with her paper spread out in front of her. "It's like planning a family reunion where everyone has different schedules and some people live in different time zones. You have to figure out when everyone can be in the same place at the same time. Except instead of people, it's entire universes." Dr. Kelthus's tentacles were now moving so frantically that Jake worried the alien might be having some kind of seizure. "She's deconstructing fundamental principles that have taken our greatest minds millennia to develop. Her neural patterns show she's experiencing enjoyment." "Enjoyment?" Jake asked, not sure he had heard correctly. "The human brain is releasing chemicals associated with pleasure and satisfaction," the Chromec confirmed. "She is deriving entertainment from the Mindbreaker protocol." Lisa had started humming again, a tune that Jake recognized as something she often hummed while grading papers. She was working steadily through her notes, occasionally erasing something and writing it differently. Every few minutes, she would look up at the holographic equation and nod as if she was confirming something she had figured out. "You know what this reminds me of?" Lisa said suddenly, looking up at the observation deck. "It's like one of those really big jigsaw puzzles with 5,000 pieces. It looks impossible when you dump all the pieces on the table, but once you start sorting them by color and pattern, it becomes manageable." Jake watched as Lisa stood up and began pointing at different sections of the equation with her pencil. "This part connects to that part over there, and if you solve this section first, it makes the rest much easier. It's all about finding the right order to work through the pieces." The silence in the observation deck was complete except for the humming of the station's systems. Jake looked at the alien faces around him and saw expressions of confusion, disbelief, and what might have been fear. "How long has she been working?" Jake asked quietly. 47 minutes, Chancellor Zexthara replied, its voice barely above a whisper. "She should have experienced complete mental breakdown 32 minutes ago." Jake looked back down at Lisa, who was now organizing her notes into neat columns and seemed to be making good progress on something. She looked like she was exactly where she wanted to be, doing exactly what she enjoyed most. "I think," Jake said slowly, "we might have underestimated what humans consider impossible." Dr. Lisa Harper was now 2 hours into the examination and had filled 7 pages with her neat handwriting. She sat comfortably on the floor of the white chamber, her legs crossed and her papers spread around her in organized piles. To Jake Morrison, watching from the observation deck, she looked like a student working on homework in her dorm room, rather than someone attempting to solve the galaxy's most challenging mathematical problem. "Could someone explain to me what she's doing?" Chancellor Zexthara asked, its crystalline body now a confused shade of yellow-green. "Her approach appears to be completely different from anything we've seen before." Dr. Kelthus the Nexari, mathematician, was studying the neural monitoring displays with growing bewilderment. Its tentacles moved in slow, thoughtful patterns as it processed the impossible readings. "She's not trying to solve the equation as a single problem. Instead, she's breaking it down into smaller pieces and treating each piece as a separate puzzle." That approach should not work, the Chromic observer stated with mechanical certainty. "The components of the Mindbreaker protocol are interconnected in ways that require simultaneous processing. Attempting to solve them separately should result in logical contradictions that cause mental breakdown." Jake watched as Lisa picked up one of her papers and began explaining her work to the empty air around her as if she was teaching a class. "So, if we look at this section here," she said, pointing to a part of the holographic equation, "we can see that it's basically asking about the relationship between cause and effect across multiple timelines." She walked over to another section of the display. "Now, this might look completely different, but it's really asking the same question, just in a different way. It's like if I asked you how many apples are in a basket and then asked you how many pieces of fruit are in the same basket if it only contains apples." Same answer, different words. The alien observers watched in fascination as Lisa continued her impromptu lecture. She seemed to be explaining the solution not just to herself, but to an imaginary audience of students who needed to understand each step of the process. "The trick is recognizing that these 17 different number systems are just different languages for describing the same mathematical relationships," Lisa continued, making notes on her paper. "It's like having the same story told in 17 different languages. The words change, but the meaning stays the same." Commander Pete Sullivan, who had been quietly watching from the back of the observation deck, moved closer to Jake. "Sir, is she actually solving it?" Jake looked at the alien faces around him and saw expressions of confusion, disbelief, and what he was beginning to recognize as fear. "I think she might be." Lisa had moved on to another section of the equation one. That had caused the complete mental breakdown of the Zorathi mathematician 50 years earlier. She studied it for a moment, then began drawing simple diagrams on her paper. To Jake, the drawings looked like basic flowcharts, the kind used in elementary computer programming classes. This temporal paradox section is really just a scheduling problem, Lisa explained to her invisible students. You have events that need to happen in a specific order, but some of those events are happening in different time streams. It's like trying to coordinate a conference call between people in different time zones, except instead of time zones, you have different universes. She drew arrows connecting different parts of her diagram. So you map out all the events, figure out which ones depend on which other ones, and then find a sequence that works for all the different timelines. It's the same process I use when I'm trying to schedule faculty meetings around everyone's teaching schedules. Dr. Kelthus made a sound that the universal translator rendered as a strangled gasp. She's treating multidimensional causality loops as a basic organizational problem. This should not be possible. Her brain activity continues to show patterns associated with enjoyment and satisfaction, the Chromek reported. She is not experiencing any cognitive stress from the examination. Lisa had now moved on to the quantum probability matrices, the section that had stumped the greatest minds in the galaxy for thousands of years. She studied the swirling mathematical relationships for several minutes, then began making more notes. "Oh, this is clever," she said with obvious appreciation. This section is asking about the probability of specific outcomes when you have multiple possible realities happening at the same time. It's like trying to predict the weather when you have to account for weather patterns in parallel universes that might affect each other. She drew what looked like a decision tree on her paper with branches spreading out in multiple directions. The math looks complicated, but the concept is straightforward. You just need to map out all the possible outcomes, figure out how likely each one is, and then account for how the different realities might influence each other. Jake watched as Lisa continued to work, her confident explanations making the impossible seem routine. She was treating mathematical concepts that had challenged entire civilizations, like basic problems that any student could understand with the right explanation. "Captain Morrison," Chancellor Zexthara said quietly, "your Dr. Harper is demonstrating cognitive abilities that we did not know were possible. She is not just solving the Mindbreaker protocol, she is explaining it in terms that make it seem simple." "That's what good teachers do," Jake replied, finally understanding why Lisa had been chosen for this mission. "They take complicated ideas and make them understandable." Lisa was now working on the final section of the equation, a part that dealt with mathematical relationships that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. She studied it for a while, then began drawing what looked like a three-dimensional cube on her flat paper. This part is asking about shapes and relationships that exist in more dimensions than we can easily visualize, she explained. But the same principles apply. If you understand how a cube relates to a square, you can extend that understanding to higher dimensions. It's the same pattern, just repeated more times. She drew additional lines and shapes, creating a complex diagram that somehow made sense even though it was representing something that should be impossible to draw on paper. The key is not to try to visualize the whole thing at once. Instead, you look at the relationships between the parts and work from there. Jake could see that the alien observers were becoming increasingly agitated as Lisa's explanations continued. She was making their ultimate intellectual challenge look like a problem that any reasonably intelligent person could solve with the right approach. "Sir," Pete Sullivan whispered, "I think she's almost finished." Jake looked down at Lisa, who was now reviewing her notes and checking her work. She had been in the examination chamber for over 3 hours, well past the point where previous candidates had suffered complete mental breakdown. Instead of showing signs of stress or confusion, she looked like someone who had just finished an enjoyable puzzle and was satisfied with her solution. "I think you're right, Pete," Jake said quietly. "And I think the galaxy is about to get a very different impression of humanity than they were expecting." Dr. Lisa Harper stood up and stretched, her joints making small popping sounds after sitting on the floor for over 4 hours. She gathered her papers into a neat stack and looked up at the holographic equation one final time, nodding to herself. With the satisfaction of someone who had just completed a challenging but enjoyable puzzle. "All finished," she announced cheerfully. walking over to place her solution on the small table that had appeared in the center of the chamber. That was quite fun, actually. Whoever designed this test has a real talent for creative problem solving. The silence in the observation deck was so complete that Jake Morrison could hear his own heartbeat. Around him, the greatest minds in the galaxy stared at the human woman who had just claimed to solve their ultimate intellectual challenge as, if she was discussing the weather, Chancellor Zexthara's crystalline body was cycling through colors so rapidly that it looked like a disco ball. "Dr. Harper, are you certain you have completed the examination?" The average time for previous attempts was 12 hours before mental breakdown occurred. Lisa checked her watch, an old mechanical timepiece that looked primitive compared to the advanced technology surrounding them. 4 hours and 17 minutes. Not bad for a first attempt. I probably could have done it faster, but I wanted to double-check my work. Dr. Kelthus' tentacles were writhing in patterns that Jake had never seen before, creating complex knots and spirals that seemed to indicate extreme agitation. This is impossible. The neural monitoring shows no signs of cognitive stress or breakdown. Her brain activity indicates she found the experience pleasurable. "Of course I did," Lisa replied, overhearing the Nexary's comment through the chamber's communication system. "I love solving puzzles. The more challenging they are, the more satisfying it is when you figure them out." The Chromek observer moved to a bank of computers and began running verification protocols on Lisa's solution. The mechanical beings. Sensors flashed in rapid sequences as it processed the mathematical relationship she had worked out. "The solution is being analyzed," the Chromek announced. "Preliminary scans indicate structural consistency across all 17-dimensional frameworks." Jake felt his stomach drop. If Lisa's solution was correct, it would mean that a human had accomplished something that the galaxy's most advanced civilizations had considered impossible. If she was wrong, it might mean that the pressure of the examination had affected her judgment in ways that weren't immediately obvious. "How long will the verification take?" Jake asked. "The Galactic Confederation's quantum computers will require approximately 37 minutes to fully verify all components of the solution," Chancellor Zexthara replied, its voice carrying notes of barely controlled anxiety Lisa had found a comfortable spot to sit and was reading her book again, apparently unconcerned about the verification process. "Take your time," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." Jake watched as more alien officials began arriving in the observation deck. Word of what was happening had apparently spread throughout the station, and beings from dozens of different species were gathering to witness the results of humanity's attempt at the Mindbreaker Protocol. Among the new arrivals was High Counselor Veltar of the Ethereal Collective, a being of pure energy that maintained a roughly humanoid shape through what Jake understood to be enormous concentration. The Ethereals were considered one of the most intellectually advanced species in the galaxy, and their presence indicated that this event was being taken very seriously. "Chancellor Zexthara," the Ethereal said, its voice like the sound of distant thunder, "we have received reports that the human candidate has claimed to solve the Mindbreaker Protocol. Surely this is an error in communication." "I'm afraid not, High Counselor," Chancellor Zexthara replied. "The human not only claims to have solved the equation, but she did so while explaining her methodology as if she was teaching a basic mathematics class." High Counselor Veltar's energy form flickered with what Jake assumed was surprise. Teaching? She was attempting to educate others while solving the most challenging intellectual problem in the known galaxy. "That's what Dr. Harper does," Jake said, stepping forward. "She's a teacher. Making complex ideas understandable is her specialty." The Ethereal turned its attention to Jake, and he felt a strange, tingling sensation as the being's consciousness briefly touched his mind. "Captain Morrison, your species continues to surprise us. First, you solve our most difficult mathematical challenge, and now you tell us that your candidate was simultaneously instructing others in the solution." "She wasn't instructing anyone in particular," Jake explained. "She was just thinking out loud, the way she does when she's working through a problem. It helps her organize her thoughts." Dr. Kalfas had been studying the neural monitoring data throughout the conversation, its tentacles moving in increasingly complex patterns. Hi, Counselor, the human's brain activity during the examination was unlike anything we have observed. Instead of the focused concentration we expect from advanced mathematical processing, she showed patterns associated with pattern recognition and creative problem solving. Creative problem solving? High Counselor Valtar asked. She treated the Mindbreaker protocol as a puzzle to be solved through intuition and analogy rather than a computational challenge requiring pure logical processing, Dr. Kalfas explained. Her approach was fundamentally different from any method we have seen before. The chromic observer suddenly made a series of electronic sounds that Jake had learned indicated extreme agitation. Verification complete. The solution is correct. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of the station's life support systems. Jake felt his knees go weak as the implications of what had just happened began to sink in. Correct? Chancellor Zexthara asked, its voice barely above a whisper. Completely correct, the Chromec confirmed. Furthermore, the solution methodology reveals previously unknown optimization pathways that reduce the computational complexity of the problem by approximately 60%. High Counselor Valtar's energy form began to pulse with rapid fluctuations. You are saying that not only did the human solve the Mindbreaker protocol, but she found a more efficient solution than any we have discovered. That is correct, the Chromic replied. Her approach has revealed fundamental inefficiencies in our traditional mathematical frameworks. Jake looked down at Lisa, who was still reading her book peacefully. She looked up and smiled at him through the observation window, apparently oblivious to the fact that she had just revolutionized galactic mathematics. Dr. Harper, Chancellor Zexthara said through the communication system, congratulations on your successful completion of the Mindbreaker protocol. You have achieved something that only 12 other species in galactic history have accomplished. Lisa closed her book and stood up. Thank you. Does this mean humanity can join the Galactic Confederation now? Dr. Harper, High Counselor Valtar, said, I believe humanity has just demonstrated that you are not seeking to join the Confederation, so much as you are preparing to transform it. Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that the galaxy's perception of humanity had just changed forever. They were no longer the primitive newcomers seeking acceptance. They had become something far more significant and potentially far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. 3 weeks had passed since Dr. Lisa Harper solved the Mindbreaker protocol, and the galaxy had not stopped talking about it. Captain Jake Morrison stood in what had once been a simple conference room aboard Kepler Prime, but was now something that looked more like a university lecture hall. Beings from dozens of different species filled the space, all waiting to attend what the station announcements called Introduction to Human Mathematical Methodology. Jake watched as Lisa entered, the room carrying her worn leather bag and the same stack of papers she had used during the examination. She looked around at the assembled aliens with the same calm expression she wore when walking into any classroom, apparently unbothered by the fact that her audience included some of the most advanced minds in the galaxy. Good morning, everyone, Lisa said, her voice carrying easily through the room's translation system. I understand you're all curious about how humans approach mathematical problems, so I thought we'd start with something simple. She walked to the large holographic display at the front of the room and began drawing what looked like a basic grid with numbers. Jake recognized it immediately as a Sudoku puzzle, the kind Lisa worked on every Sunday morning with her coffee. This is called Sudoku, Lisa explained to the bewildered alien audience. The goal is to fill in the empty squares so that every row, column, and box contains the numbers 1 through 9 exactly once. High Counselor Valtar, whose energy form was flickering with what Jake had learned indicated intense concentration, spoke first. Dr. Harper, how does this simple number arrangement relate to the complex mathematical principles you demonstrated during the Mindbreaker protocol? Lisa smiled the way she did when a student asked exactly the right question. That's the beautiful thing about human thinking. We don't see this as different from the complex equation you showed me. Both are just patterns that need to be recognized and organized. She began filling in some of the numbers, explaining her reasoning as she went. See, when I look at this empty square, I can see that it can't be a 5 because there's already a 5 in this row. It can't be a 3 because there's a 3 in this column. By eliminating what it can't be, I narrow down what it could be. Doctor. Kelthus's tentacles were moving in slow, thoughtful patterns as it processed Lisa's explanation. You are using logical elimination, but your processing method appears to be intuitive rather than computational. Exactly, Lisa said, continuing to work on the puzzle. I'm not calculating every possible combination. I'm looking for patterns and making connections. When I see that this box needs a 7 and there's only one place it can go, I don't need to check every other possibility. The Chromec observer made a series of electronic sounds that indicated confusion. This approach should be inefficient. Systematic analysis of all possibilities would guarantee optimal results. Lisa paused in her work and looked at the mechanical being with genuine curiosity. Would it, though? How long would it take you to systematically check every possible combination? For a standard Sudoku puzzle, approximately 4.7 seconds, the Chromec replied. That's very impressive, Lisa said. But what if I told you that most humans can solve these puzzles in about 10 minutes without doing any systematic calculations at all? The room fell silent as the implications of what she was saying sank in. She was describing a problem-solving method that was supposedly less efficient but achieved similar results through completely different means. The thing is, Lisa continued, filling in more numbers, humans don't just solve problems. We enjoy solving them. This puzzle isn't work for me, it's relaxation. I do these for fun on Sunday mornings. Chancellor Zexthara's crystalline body was shifting through confused colors as it spoke. Dr. Harper, are you suggesting that your species derives pleasure from intellectual challenges that other beings would consider tedious computational tasks? Not just intellectual challenges, Lisa replied, finishing the Sudoku puzzle with a satisfied smile. We like all kinds of puzzles. Crosswords, jigsaw puzzles, riddles, word games. We even create puzzles just for the fun of solving them. She moved to another section of the holographic display and began drawing what looked like a simple maze. Take this, for example. There's no practical purpose to a maze except to present a problem that needs solving. But humans create them anyway, because we enjoy the challenge of finding our way through them. High Counselor Veltar's energy form was pulsing with rapid fluctuations that Jake recognized as the ethereal equivalent of excitement. You are describing a fundamental difference in cognitive approach. Where most species view problem-solving as a necessary task to achieve specific goals, humans appear to view problem-solving as an inherently rewarding activity. That's exactly right, Lisa said, beginning to trace a path through the maze. When you presented me with the Mindbreaker protocol, you saw it as a test that I needed to pass. I saw it as an interesting puzzle that I wanted to solve. She paused and looked around the room at the assembled aliens. The difference is that you were thinking about the consequences of failure, while I was thinking about the satisfaction of finding the solution. Dr. Kelthus's tentacles had formed complex knots that indicated deep thought. This explains the neural activity we observed during your examination. You were not experiencing stress because you were not focused on the potential negative outcomes. Right. Lisa said, I was focused on the problem itself, not on what would happen if I couldn't solve it. Jake watched as the alien representatives began to understand the implications of what Lisa was describing. Humanity's approach to intellectual challenges was fundamentally different from anything they had encountered before. Dr. Harper, Chancellor, Zexthara said, would you be willing to work with our mathematicians to develop new problem-solving methodologies based on human cognitive approaches? Lisa's face lit up with the same expression she wore when discussing a particularly interesting mathematical concept with her colleagues. I'd love to, but I have one condition. What condition? High Counselor Veltar asked. I want to learn about your mathematical systems too, Lisa said. The Mindbreaker protocol was fascinating, but I could tell there were underlying principles that I didn't fully understand. I'd like to study them. Jake smiled as he realized what was happening. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had intended to test humanity's worthiness to join their confederation. Instead, they had discovered that humans might be able to teach them entirely new ways of understanding the universe. Dr. Harper, High Counselor Veltar said, I believe we can arrange for a comprehensive exchange of mathematical knowledge. In fact, I suspect that humanity's membership in the Galactic Confederation will be somewhat different from what we originally anticipated. Different how? Jake asked. Instead of joining as students, the ethereal replied, I believe humans will be joining as teachers. Lisa was already pulling out her notebook, apparently ready to start taking notes on alien mathematical systems. Well, she said with a smile, I've always believed that the best way to really understand something is to try teaching it to someone else. Jake looked around the room at the alien faces and realized that the galaxy was about to discover what human curiosity could accomplish when given access to millions of years of accumulated knowledge. He had a feeling that things were about to become very interesting indeed.